My name is Captain Emily Carter, United States Army. 8 years in service, 2 tours in Iraq, and a record so clean it could shine. When I came home to Texas, I thought my battles were finally over. I was wrong. The real war waited for me right outside my father's church. It was a Sunday morning, the kind that smelled like rain and dust. The steeple bell had just finished ringing when two police cruisers pulled up to the curb. People turned from the church steps, squinting into the light as officers stepped out. I thought maybe something had happened nearby, some accident. Then, one of them called my name. "Captain Carter, we have a warrant for your arrest." The world tilted a little. They said the words clearly, as if rehearsed, like it was routine. Theft. $50,000. The charity fund I had run in Mosul. I stood frozen on the gravel, the sound of the congregation fading behind me. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered, "Her?" I remember the sharp crack of my boots as I took a single step back. My voice sounded distant when I asked, "There must be a mistake." That was when I saw him. My father stood on the church steps, his hands still clutching the worn leather Bible he never went anywhere without. Reverend James Carter, the man who baptized half this town, the man who taught me that honesty was next to godliness. He didn't look surprised. He looked tired, like he'd been waiting for this. "You brought shame to this house," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. The officers moved in, professional, almost apologetic. One of them recited my rights, while the other slipped the cuffs over my wrists. I could feel the eyes on me, eyes I had known my whole life. Mrs. Parker from the bakery, Mr. Hill from the gas station. Kids I used to babysit now holding their phones up, recording. Someone muttered that I had stolen from God's children. Another said, "Guess the uniform doesn't make you honest." I kept my chin up. Years in the Army teach you that posture is everything when the world turns against you. The cuffs were cold, but not colder than the silence between me and my father. He walked past me as they led me to the car. I caught his scent, a mix of coffee and old cologne. He didn't look at me. "You've forgotten who you are," he said quietly, almost to himself. I wanted to tell him that he was wrong, that I remembered exactly who I was. The problem was, no one else did. At the station, they let me make one call. I dialed a number I hadn't used in years, an old Army contact who still owed me a favor. My voice didn't shake when I said, "I need a lawyer who understands military records." When I hung up, I sat in the interrogation room staring at my reflection in the one-way glass. The uniform I'd worn that morning still smelled of starch and dust, but now it looked foreign, like it belonged to someone else. Later, when they released me on bail, I walked back to my truck parked across from the church. The congregation had already dispersed. Only the wind moved, carrying scraps of paper across the empty lot. My father's sermon board still read, "Faith Restores." I stood there for a long time, trying to remember what faith felt like. That night, I unpacked the duffel bag I had carried through 3 deployments. The medals glinted in the dim light, meaningless against the weight pressing on my chest. I thought of the children in Mosul, of every receipt, every report I had signed. I knew the money was accounted for. I also knew someone wanted to erase that truth. When I finally lay down, I could still hear my father's voice in my head. That single line echoing through the silence. "You brought shame to this house." Maybe he believed it. Maybe everyone did. But I had carried soldiers through worse storms than this, and I wasn't about to let lies bury the one thing I'd never lost my honor. So, I made myself a promise. Tomorrow, I'd start digging for the truth, no matter who I had to face, even if it was my own blood. Because if the Army taught me anything, it's that you don't surrender when the fight gets personal. You stand taller, and you make the truth your weapon. War has a way of changing the way you see people. In Iraq, you stop looking for good or bad. You start looking for who's still trying. That's what kept me going when the bombs fell too close. or when the children showed up barefoot at the gates of our camp. I wasn't there to fight. Not really. I was there to manage the charity fund that kept them fed and clothed. The same fund now used to drag my name through the dirt. I can still smell the sand in Mosul, hot, metallic, mixed with diesel and burnt coffee. Every morning started before sunrise, when the horizon turned gray and the call to prayer echoed over the ruins. I'd meet with the local teachers, check our supply lists, make sure the aid trucks reached the right neighborhoods. We never had enough of anything, but we learned to make enough of everything. Lieutenant Ryan used to tease me for keeping such neat records. "You'd make a great accountant, Captain," he'd say, half grinning under the dust. I'd roll my eyes and tell him discipline was the only thing keeping us alive. He was the kind of soldier who laughed at chaos but never ignored pain. One night, as we patched bullet holes in the clinic's wall, he said something I never forgot. "You know, Emily, people back home won't understand this. They'll think charity is just about money. They'll never see the nights we bled for it." He was right. I just didn't know how right until I came home. The people here couldn't see the kids who hugged me when the food arrived or the mothers who cried when we handed out blankets. They only saw numbers on a report and assumed the worst. My father, most of all. He never wanted me in the army. Said it wasn't a place for women or for his daughter. I joined anyway, not to rebel, but to prove that service meant something beyond sermons. He preached faith on Sundays, but I lived it in the desert. When I called home during deployment, he'd keep the conversation short. "Come back when you're done pretending to be a soldier," he'd say. I stopped calling after that. Now I sit at my kitchen table surrounded by papers, digital logs, and a laptop glowing with files from my deployment. The screen reflects the same exhaustion I saw in Ryan's eyes the last time we spoke. I start reviewing every transaction, every entry tied to the fund. My hands move automatically, but my mind drifts. The report that got me arrested lists a transfer made 2 weeks before I left Iraq. I remember that day clearly. The network was down. We were under lockdown. There's no way I could have made that transaction. I zoom in on the document, on the digital signature tagged with my ID. Something feels off. The timestamp doesn't match the military clock format I always used. The font looks different too. Whoever did this knew the system, but not my habits. I cross-check the metadata and feel my stomach twist. The origin address isn't from the base, it's from somewhere in the States. I lean back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. Someone forged my digital signature. Someone wanted this to look clean. My first thought is to call the Army's cyber division. But I know how slow the chain of command works. And this isn't a military problem anymore. It's personal. Outside, the evening light turns the town gold. From my window, I can see the steeple of my father's church cutting against the sky. It used to make me proud. Now it just feels like a wall between us. He believes I'm guilty. And nothing I say will change that. Not yet. On the shelf by the door sits a wooden photo frame of my parents. My mother's smile still softens the air. She died 10 years ago, but I can still hear her voice when the house gets quiet. Truth doesn't shout, Emily. It waits for you to stand tall enough to see it. She was the only one who believed I belonged in uniform. A memory hits me then. After her funeral, my father locked her study and never opened it again. I remember glimpsing a small box on her desk with my name on it. Back then, I thought it was just keepsakes. Now, with everything collapsing around me, I'm not so sure. I close the laptop and sit in the silence. Somewhere inside that house might be the only proof that clears my name. Maybe she left more than memories. Maybe she left answers. Tomorrow I'll find out. The courthouse in Waverly County looked smaller than I remembered. But that morning it felt like the center of the world. Reporters crowded the steps, their cameras clicking as I walked through the doors. I kept my head high and my uniform neat. Years of military discipline had taught me how to walk into chaos without showing fear. Inside, the air buzzed with whispers. The people who once shook my hand after Sunday service were now waiting to see if I'd fall. My father sat in the first row, hands folded over his Bible, his jaw tight. He didn't look at me. Behind him, members of his congregation filled the benches like spectators at a funeral. I could feel their stares pressing into my back. My lawyer, Captain Rachel Monroe, a former JAG officer, leaned toward me and whispered, "Stay calm, Captain. Truth takes time to land." I nodded, even though the weight in my chest felt like it was crushing me. The bailiff called the room to order, and the judge entered with quiet authority. "State versus Captain Emily Carter," he read. My name echoed off the wood-paneled walls, followed by the shuffle of papers. The prosecutor, a sharp-faced man named Richard Glenn, adjusted his tie and began his opening statement. "Your Honor, this case is about betrayal," he said. "About a soldier who used her position to steal $50,000 from a humanitarian fund meant for war victims." The room murmured. Glenn glanced toward the crowd, like a performer feeding on applause. He pulled up the projected exhibits, bank transfers, email logs, digital signatures that carried my name. "Every trail," he said, "leads back to Captain Carter's own account." I stared at the screen, forcing myself to breathe evenly. I'd reviewed those same records for hours. The forger had done their homework. The signature was perfect, the timestamps flawless. Except for one small inconsistency, I'd noticed something the prosecution clearly hadn't caught yet. Rachel stood to respond. "My client has served this country with distinction. She was in a secure military compound in Mosul during the time these transactions occurred. We intend to prove that someone forged her credentials and used her name to transfer the funds." Glenn smirked. "Convenient," he said. "The perfect alibi. Hard to check what happens in a war zone." My lawyer didn't flinch. "Harder to fake honor," she said. A few heads turned. The judge motioned for the first witness. The bank's digital security officer took the stand, explaining how my ID had been verified by a multi-factor system. As he spoke, I studied my father. He still hadn't looked at me. His face stayed fixed on the prosecutor like he was listening to a sermon he already agreed with. I wanted him to see me, to remember the girl who used to sit in the front pew, wearing her ROTC pin. But all I saw was disappointment, carved deep as stone. When the prosecution finished, the judge turned to me. "Captain Carter, do you wish to speak?" I stood, my voice steady. "Yes, Your Honor. I understand what the evidence looks like, but I also know who I am. My record, my oath, and every mission I've led speak for me." "I didn't steal that money." Glenn interrupted with a chuckle. "Then who did?" he asked. I met his eyes. "That's what I intend to find out." A few people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. The judge raised a hand. "Enough," he said. "We'll reconvene tomorrow. Defense, prepare your counter-evidence." He struck the gavel, and the room emptied in a low hum of whispers. I felt every step of my father's as he walked past. He paused only long enough to say, "The truth doesn't hide, Emily. Maybe it's time you stopped." Then he was gone. Outside, the afternoon light felt harsh. Reporters shouted questions, but I ignored them. Rachel and I stepped into the parking lot, both too drained to speak. She finally said, "There's something off about those timestamps. The formatting isn't standard military." I nodded. "I noticed. We'll need technical help," she said. "Someone who knows digital footprints." That night, I called Lena, my old communications tech from Iraq. She was blunt as ever. "Send me the file," she said. "If someone faked your login, they left fingerprints." I emailed everything and waited. Hours passed. I sat by the window watching the church steeple across the street, its lights glowing faintly through the fog. The thought came uninvited. What if the truth wasn't out there somewhere, but closer, too close to see? Just after midnight, my phone buzzed. Lena's voice was tight. "Emily, you're not going to like this. The access point used for that forged signature traces back to Waverly County, more specifically, the church office on Main Street." I went still. My father's church. The same building where he told the world I'd shamed our family. I closed my eyes and let out a slow breath. The truth was coming, and it was standing on holy ground. The house looked smaller at night. The porch light flickered weakly, throwing long shadows across the steps. I parked down the street, heart thudding harder than it ever had in a combat zone. Breaking into my childhood home wasn't part of any plan I had imagined for myself. But if Lena was right, the answers I needed were inside. The wind carried the faint sound of crickets, and for a moment, I almost turned back. Then I thought of my mother's voice, soft and steady, telling me that truth only hides from those who stop looking. The back door creaked the same way it used to when I'd sneak in after curfew. The smell hit me first, cedar, old paper, and the faint trace of her perfume still lingering in the air after all these years. The kitchen was just as she had left it before she died. Her tea kettle sat on the counter, the same one she used every morning before church. I moved quietly down the hall, the wood floor groaning under my boots. Every sound felt too loud. Every picture on the wall seemed to watch me as I passed. Her study door was closed. My father had sealed it shut the day after her funeral and never stepped inside again. My hand trembled as I turned the knob. It clicked open with a sigh of stale air. Dust floated in the beam of my flashlight, tiny ghosts of years gone by. The room smelled like paper and lavender. Books lined the shelves, and her writing desk sat in the corner beneath the window, just as I remembered. I traced my fingers over its surface, then froze. There, under a small stack of yellowed church bulletins, was a wooden box. It was darker than the rest of the desk, carved with careful hands. On the lid, written in my mother's looping script, were the words, "To Emily, when truth feels heavy." My throat tightened. I sat down slowly, afraid that moving too fast might break the moment. The lid creaked open. Inside was a folded letter sealed with wax and a small silver flash drive. The paper shook slightly in my hands as I read her words. "My dearest Emily, if you're reading this, then life has tested you in ways I always feared it might. Your father's faith is strong, but his pride is stronger. Forgive him before he asks for it. He will come to see that you inherited the best parts of us both. And if someone ever questions your honor, look for what I've left you. The truth is often quiet, but it never disappears." Tears blurred the ink. I pressed the paper to my chest and let the silence wrap around me. The flash drive felt warm between my fingers. I slipped it into my pocket and left the room as quietly as I'd entered. Outside, the air was colder. The stars above the steeple flickered like they were watching. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel afraid. I felt guided. The next morning, the court resumed. Reporters lined the halls, their voices echoing off marble floors. Rachel met me at the steps, her eyes scanning my face. "You found something," she said. I handed her the flash drive. "Proof," I whispered. Inside the courtroom, the judge called for order as we took our seats. The prosecutor stood ready, confident. But when Rachel plugged the drive into the display monitor, his smirk faltered. The video opened with static. Then my mother's face appeared. She was sitting at that same desk, the sun glowing through the curtains behind her. Her voice filled the room, soft but steady. "If you're hearing this, James, it means our daughter has been tested. You always feared she'd inherit my stubbornness, but I prayed she'd inherit your faith. Emily has both. She's done nothing dishonorable. You must remember that her service, her choices, are the legacy we built together." The room went silent. My father's head dropped into his hands. The judge leaned forward, eyes softening. The recording continued. "Truth doesn't hide behind walls, James. It waits for you to open the door. Don't let pride close it forever." The screen faded to black. Rachel cleared her throat and handed the printed documents from the drive to the clerk. "Your Honor, the data contains original fund logs, timestamps, and encrypted transfers verified by the U.S. Army's network. Every dollar accounted for." The judge reviewed the files, nodding slowly. Glenn tried to object, but his voice cracked mid-sentence. The weight of the evidence was too clear. I didn't look at the reporters or the crowd. My eyes stayed on my father. He finally lifted his gaze, and for the first time since the arrest, I saw not anger but heartbreak. He mouthed a single word: Grace. My mother's name. The judge called for a recess. I sat back, hands folded, heart heavy. The truth had spoken, but it hadn't shouted. It came in my mother's voice, calm and unwavering, cutting through pride and doubt like light through a stained glass window. When the gavel struck, the sound felt distant. The courtroom stayed hushed. No applause, no outburst. Just the quiet sound of people breathing, of faith rediscovered. I felt vindicated, but not victorious. The truth had set me free, but it had also broken something open inside me. My mother had done what I couldn't, she'd made him listen. I closed my eyes, letting the silence settle like a prayer. The next morning, the courtroom felt different. The air was heavy, but still, as if everyone sensed the ending was near. I sat at the defense table, hands folded, eyes fixed on the flag behind the judge's bench. The whispers that had followed me for weeks were gone. Even the reporters stayed quiet, cameras lowered out of some unspoken respect. When the judge entered, everyone stood. He adjusted his glasses, glanced at the evidence, then at me. Captain Emily Carter, he began, his voice steady but soft. This court has reviewed the records, the data, and the testimony. The evidence presented by the defense confirms that the accused did not commit fraud. The charges are dismissed. The sound of the gavel echoed once. Just like that, it was over. For a second, I couldn't move. I heard a few gasps, a muffled sob from somewhere in the back. Then I felt every ounce of tension leaving my body at once. My lawyer touched my arm gently, whispering, "You did it." But I hadn't done it alone. My mother had done it. The truth had done it. I turned to look at my father. He sat frozen, his eyes locked on the bench, his face pale. The judge added quietly, "This case is a reminder that integrity, when tested, must be protected not by pride, but by courage." Then he dismissed the room. Chairs scraped. People began to rise. My father stayed seated. When I stood, he finally looked up. For the first time in months, maybe years, his expression wasn't hard. It was hollow, fragile. He walked toward me slowly, his Bible still clutched in his hand like a lifeline. "I was wrong," he said. His voice trembled, but it was clear. The room fell silent again. "I let pride speak louder than faith. I thought I was protecting your mother's memory, but I was really protecting myself." He swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. "Can you forgive me?" I could have said many things then. I could have reminded him of every insult, every look of shame, every Sunday he'd used the pulpit to preach about sin, while his own daughter sat accused. But all I felt was peace. "I already did," I said quietly. His eyes widened, as if he hadn't believed I would say it. I smiled, not out of victory, but understanding. "You taught me that forgiveness is what faith really means. I just had to learn it the hard way." He nodded, his lips trembling, then reached for my hand. When our fingers met, the years of anger between us seemed to fade. Around us, the room stayed still. No applause, no noise. Just the quiet sound of two people finding their way back. Outside, the world looked new. Reporters shouted questions again, but I kept walking, sunlight cutting through the clouds. My father walked beside me, his pace slower now, as if each step cost him a little pride, but gave him back a little peace. When we reached the top of the courthouse steps, he whispered, "Your mother would be proud." I looked up at the sky and felt like she already was. A month later, I stood in the same church where it all began. The walls had been repainted, the cross polished to a shine. My father sat in the front pew, listening quietly as I spoke to a small crowd. "The Grace Fund," I said, "will continue the mission my mother believed in, helping families of soldiers find hope again." A photo of her smiled from the table beside me, framed in simple wood. After the service, people stayed behind to shake my hand. No one spoke about the trial. No one needed to. Outside, the children from the congregation played near the steps, their laughter rising through the air. My father came up beside me, slipping a folded envelope into my hand. "It's from the church," he said. "The first donation." I looked at him and smiled. "Thank you, Dad." He nodded, his voice low. "No, Emily, thank you for reminding me what grace looks like." As the sun dipped behind the steeple, I stood there watching the light spill across the stained glass. The world had moved on, but something inside me had settled at last. Forgiveness wasn't surrender. It was the quiet victory that healed what pride had broken. The cemetery sat on a hill overlooking the edge of town. The grass was trimmed short, and the air smelled faintly of pine and rain. I parked near the gate and walked the familiar path, the one I had taken 10 years ago when we laid my mother to rest. The ground was soft under my boots, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like time itself is holding its breath. Her grave was simple, a small stone, her name etched clean, with the words, "Loved beyond measure" underneath. I knelt down, brushing away the fallen leaves, and placed the folded letter beside the headstone. Then I took the medal from my uniform pocket and set it next to it. The silver caught the morning light, reflecting the sky like still water. For a long moment, I just sat there. No tears, no words. Just the calm that comes when something inside finally stops fighting. I thought about everything that had happened, the accusations, the courtroom, the silence between me and my father. I realized then that the hardest battle I'd ever fought wasn't in Iraq or in that courtroom. It was in my own heart. Learning to forgive had taken more courage than any mission I'd ever led. A breeze moved through the trees, carrying the faint sound of church bells from town. I smiled a little, imagining she could hear them too. "You were right, Mom," I whispered. "Honor isn't something people give you. It's something you live quietly, every day." As I stood to leave, sunlight broke through the clouds, spilling across the rows of stones. I looked back one last time and felt peace settle deep in my chest. Because home isn't a place. It's the moment you choose grace over anger and let your heart finally stand still.